All right, hello, and thanks for joining us for this episode of the Marketing Guides for Small Business podcast. My name is Paul, and today I'm joined by Jen, Ian, and Ken, and together we're your marketing guide. So, on this podcast, we talk a lot about content and digital marketing, but you can't have any of that if you don't have a website. And at some point, you're probably going to have to migrate your website, whether you want to or not, for a lot of different reasons. And I'm not suggesting you do this yourself, but it's important to have an understanding of the process so you know what's involved and why it may take more time than you think, and at least ask the right questions. So, Jen, start with you. Anyone that's ever been involved in website migration has probably heard the expect your traffic to drop scenario. And that can happen, but it doesn't have to. So, can you talk a little bit about what an unsuccessful migration might look like?
Yeah, sure. Just because we're going into the website and all the technical back end of what it takes to have a website really up and running properly, it doesn't mean that some of the common sense of running a regular project don't apply. So what we have found and in the industry, an unsuccessful migration, what Paul's talking about, would be a drop in traffic. So if your website is used to getting a certain amount of traffic per day, per week, per month, looking at a drop and a significant drop that ends up taking months and months and months to recoup. So it would be the kind of thing that, this project, while you're migrating for all the good reasons we'll talk about later in the podcast about why you would do that, it kind of, shoots you in the foot because your traffic is paying the price for that migration. So that's a myth because it doesn't have to be that way. So a successful migration would be, you got to expect a bit of a mini drop. So when we say a mini drop, maybe it's 20% traffic. I jump in here, guys, if there's an actual number to expect, but that would be over a short period of time, being a couple of weeks. And so it would be essentially, if you're looking at your analytics once a month, it would essentially be, I don't want to say a little blip, but a blip that you can see recovery happening. And then the whole point of a website migration, as we'll get into, is to do things better, is to make that, we call it your 24/7 salesperson, be working harder and better for you. So one of the end goals is going to be more traffic that you want as a result of this migration. So in summary, unsuccessful would be a drop in traffic, and don't buy into the myth that it's expected and it's something that you have to deal with, because done right, you may experience a little blip, but you're on your way. You're on your way to more traffic if it's done right.
And one of the things that might cause that, I think we're going to talk about this a little more later, is not paying attention to your URL structure. If your URL structure changes, and this happened a lot when going from HTTP to HTTPS to Google, that's a different URL. And if you don't have those redirects in place, you would definitely see a traffic drop. So that's one of the things to definitely look out for. So Ken, following up on what Jen just talked about, what would a successful migration look like?
Yeah. So, and I know Ian's going to talk about the different types of migrations, so you always have to kind of approach it from, what are you trying to accomplish? What are your goals? And literally it can just be rebuilding a website on a better platform. It could be addressing, as Paul, as you mentioned, dealing with, HTTPS so that you have a secure website, which is important in the eyes of Google and other search engines. And not all websites have made that transition yet. And that's really the focus of what you're trying to accomplish. So it always is going to come down to how can you minimize or even eliminate the loss of traffic? Because as Jen said, it is a myth. It doesn't have to happen. There may be a little bit of a hiccup, depending on the complexity of what you're working on. And, it may be something that you just have to do, and then as rapidly as you can remediate and fix those issues to get your traffic back up. But you got to think about what you're trying to accomplish. And I think the key thing is, you've got to map out the types of the migration that you're doing, And then it's also going to be a factor of how big or complex is the website. How many pages do you have? How many files do you have on the website? How big are those files? Honestly, so many websites are so poorly structured, and so the risk of migrating to a better structure, a better platform, uh, honestly, for many businesses, it shouldn't be that big of a risk, if it's a risk at all, if you hire the right company to do so. And so I know you're asking for examples. I mean, an example would be, where you basically see no drop off in traffic, and as soon as you implement the new site, you actually start to see more traffic because it has better characteristics of what Google and the search engines and the searchers want to see, which I know we're going to kind of elaborate on here more. I guess my advice is, you know, we see way too many times people blow away their old site and they destroy whatever SEO they've built up because they change their URL structure because they don't know any better. My advice is hire somebody who has both the SEO understanding and the technical chops to be able to do the job. And honestly, most marketing companies don't have that. And sadly, most business owners don't know to ask for that. So you really do need to work with somebody who has got some technical understanding of what a website really is, and all of the things that you have to factor in to being able to do this successfully, or you're going to be playing with fire, and you might have the unfortunate drop in traffic scenario instead of one that actually, if there's anything at all, it's almost an immediate uptick in traffic. So,
and if I could add one thing to that, for me, from a successful migration standpoint, is that nobody notices anything, right? Google doesn't notice the change, the customer, unless it's a positive change you're trying to make, like a refresh or something. But nobody notices. It's totally seamless. That's a successful migration in my books.
yeah.
And Ken, one of the things you kind of alluded to is going to a different platform. If you're on really bad hosting, your website's slow this day and age, that's a ranking factor for Google. So if you're migrating to a better platform that increases your load time, that's gonna help all the way around.
That's a great point, Paul. I mean, what if you've had your website for 5 years or more, you may have bought at the time what at the time was a pretty solid, competent website hosting platform. Especially if we're talking about like WordPress or something like that, where you have a hosted WordPress installation. Many of those companies have been acquired and they're treated as commodities, and it's how much can you slam on to particular servers because that's how they get their efficiency, and they drive their prices are low for a reason, so that they can get as many people on there as possible. And it's like, think about, I just ask every business owner, when it comes to your website hosting, do you really want to pay for the absolute cheapest possible solution? Or do you want to get your best placement, in prime real estate online, the only thing that you own and ultimately control, in an environment that is going to give you the best performance and the best opportunity for visibility? I can't tell. I mean, it's like penny wise, pound foolish. People think, okay, I can spend $10 a month for hosting, woohoo, or $120 a year. Yeah, you can. You better not expect great results with that.
Yeah, and speaking of that's the only thing you own, look at the mess Google caused with the Google business profiles over the past month.
Yeah.
And that hurt a lot of businesses, and you have no control over that. You're at the mercy of Google.
It's rented land.
Yep.
Well, so to speak. I mean, you don't pay for it, but if you're making an investment in it, you're still paying for it in other ways.
So Ian, there's a lot of different types of website migrations, and we don't have time to go into all of them now. But can you explain some of the more common ones or talk about them a little bit?
Yeah. I'll just mention kind of the 5 big buckets, and there's lots of derivatives of these, and then I'll just share kind of the ones we come across the most as well. So I would say the most common is design and user experience changes. So these are migrations happening to facilitate significant user experience driven changes, whether it's the look and feel, new, well, I'll save content for a second, but media changes, site performance issues, all of that kind of stuff. The second is content changes. So these are migrations that happen when you significantly add or remove pages or content. Maybe you're consolidating pages or content, introducing multiple languages on your website, that kind of stuff. The third is structural changes. These are when significant site hierarchy, navigation, linking, or user journey changes are made. And I'll explain that one a little bit more because we do run into that one fairly often. Platform changes is the fourth one, and these take place when moving your website to a new platform or upgrading your platform, or sometimes when integrating different platforms into your existing one or different technologies. And the fifth one is site location changes. So this takes place when your domain changes or you're rebranding your business. Maybe you're merging multiple brands or merging parts of websites into one. Converting your website, you mentioned earlier, from non-secure HTTP to secure HTTPS websites. That one was one of the most common ones a few years ago when Google started actually showing people that you are on an insecure website, non-secure website. So that was the biggest one for quite a while because pretty much any legitimate business had to make that migration. But the ones that we run into most often, besides the HTTP to HTTPS, are the design and experience changes, because most businesses should be refreshing at least their website every 2 years, 3 years tops, right? Technology changes, what we perceive as quality and contemporary and up to date changes pretty quickly on the internet. If you can do it even quicker than that or a shorter timeline, then do it. But that's pretty significant. And then the other one we run into quite a bit is structural changes. And usually these take place or are determined because once we do a site audit, we determine hey, whoever built your website was, yes, it might have even looked good on the outside, but when we look at the actual structure of it, it makes no sense. First of all, people wouldn't understand it logically, and Google definitely does not see the interlinking of how your website structure works, because there should be a hierarchy that makes sense, right? Just like an index in a book, your website should kind of be structured in a way that makes sense to people and to Google. And then, the other one we run into a lot is content changes. But usually these aren't radically big content changes. These are just new content. Sometimes it's maybe doing the redirects that you guys talked about. Maybe it's merging content, that kind of stuff. But those are the ones we run into the most.
Well, all right. So let me throw one more thing in there, because we're talking about website migration. There's also times where you may move your domain to a different registrar, and that brings up another set of issues. And Ken had talked about a marketing company that doesn't understand the technical issues. A lot of times they'll do what's easiest for them, and they'll just move the name servers instead of moving the domain and then putting the DNS records in. And we've seen email break. We've seen all kinds of things break because you change name servers, your DNS records go away. And if you don't understand what you're doing, you can break a lot of things, and it can be difficult to recover from that. So just want to throw that in there. Ken.
And that's a great point. If I can just add to that, Paul, we're going through a website migration with a client right now. And one of our standard questions when we're talking about the migration for them is, and usually it's a hosting change, right? Is, where do you currently host your emails? A lot of businesses have transitioned into Microsoft Office 365 or G Suite with Google. But if it's website hosted emails, then you have to be super, super careful there. But yeah, even if it's one of these main email platforms, if you break those DNS connections, you need to get those working really fast, or nobody's sending or receiving any emails. So that's an awesome point, Paul.
Yeah, Ken and me have seen this quite a bit where 10 years ago, I guess it made sense. You get your domain and you have your email with them, and you should never do that because, like you just mentioned, if you move from one registrar to another and your email is tied to that registrar, now you have two options. You either continue to pay for that, or you're entering an email migration issue, which you would think as long as email has been around that email migration would be a simple, straightforward thing, and it is not.
It's not, yeah.
And unfortunately, for many businesses, that is their main business system.
Yeah.
Is their business email. And so, it can lock you into a really bad situation, and as Paul mentioned, it's not necessarily an easy process. And if you've had your email for a while, the migration process itself can take a very long time. So that's why it's important to, really work with a company that has a clue about how to set all of this stuff up properly. Their inclination is going to be to go do what's easy for them because that's the most profitable way. And I'll be honest, I feel like, and this is a dilemma I've had the entire time I've had my company, and Paul and I talk about this a lot. We lose a lot of money up front because stuff was never done the way it should have been. And, it's really hard for people to get it until they start to work through it with us, so they never want to pay for it. I probably underbill for it, honestly, because I'm a sucker because I want to take care of people. And please just talk to people and try to get an understanding of how much do they really understand from a technical perspective. Marketing is no longer, it hasn't been for a long time, just about creating pretty stuff. It's content understanding and SEO understanding and technical understanding, the pretty stuff understanding. But you need to have somebody who understands what the hell they're doing when it comes to technology. And they also have to have project management skills. And if they don't have those things, you're playing with fire, in my opinion. Sorry, I'm on my soapbox.
Yeah, I did an email migration a while back for a company, and it literally took 3 days, as in 72 hours. That migration ran nonstop for 3 days before it completed.
Yeah.
So it's something to, again, know the right questions to ask, which is part of the reason I chose this topic, much to the chagrin of everyone else.
Well, and one thing we don't really talk about in here, but as you were discussing, Paul and Ken, one of the things that I've seen too is integrations with other systems, because usually your website doesn't stand alone, right? If you're a business and you have a CRM system or marketing automation system, whatever it is, call tracking, like if you're migrating your website in any way, if you're doing a big refresh and the company you've hired doesn't understand those integrations and hasn't mapped out, like, how are we going to maintain those integrations through this process, you're going to have a lot of breakages there. And that could hurt your business significantly.
Yeah, we run into that a lot.
Yeah.
So that actually it's kind of a good lead into my question for Jen. What are some common pitfalls to be aware of that can cause a migration to go sideways?
You said Ken, but you mean Jen, right?
Oh, Jen, sorry.
How about that?
I was looking at the wrong thing.
It's a good thing my name's not Ben.
I think he referred to me because I was on my soapbox talking about problems.
I see.
As a
Okay.
segue to the question you wanted to ask.
All right. Hey, get off your soapbox. Here's my soapbox. Okay, some of the pitfalls to be aware of, and again, for those of us in the audience, including myself, who are not particularly technical, a lot of the pitfalls, mirror any kind of regular non-technical project that goes off the rails, right? I mean, number one being like the strategy is wrong. Like, why are you even migrating? Like, is that misguided? So that can start you off on the wrong foot, as it were. Another one is lack of resources. So there's the lack of the skilled people to help you out with this migration. It's not something that you can just do within a couple of minutes, as I think you've heard. There's also lack of expertise. So if your SEO person isn't involved, your UX person isn't involved. I mean, one thing does impact the other. Of course, your website is set up so Google understands what it's about, but you also, on the other side, you need the humans to be able to read it and to actually take that action based on what you're promoting with your business. Next would be the lack of testing. So with anything technical, as there's any change made, there really has to be the testing to make sure that everything is working properly. I know we take it for granted that technology just works, but believe me, when you think it's working, it's not. So just making sure. No, it doesn't. I mean, for us non-technical folks, we've been to the moon. Migrating a website is probably less serious. Oh yeah, there's another podcast. So. Anyways, let's get back to it. So the lack of testing. So you got to test. You really do make sure everything's working. And then the last two, as you test, you're going to find out that there's a bug, or as you try to use the site, there will be bugs in there. So if you're slow to fix those, or it's not really important, we'll get around to it. You don't want to take that attitude within your migration. You want to have everything, like a set project, get it all done, and have it be done once the project has been started and then it is finished. And then the last thing, and I think this is why you need someone who's really experienced on your project team when you're migrating, is the underestimating the scale of the project. I mean, sure, you might think, we're a little website, we're not as big, we're not selling a bunch of stuff. It shouldn't take that much time at all. This will be an easy thing. Many website development projects, many migrations take longer and are a bigger endeavor than you would think. So don't underestimate the scale of the project. And that's why you need some experts to really help you, to give you a lay of the land on what to expect and what's needed to make this a success for your company.
Yeah, if you have a huge website, as in number of pages, it's obviously going to take longer because there's more stuff to deal with. But a lot of the steps involved in a migration are the same, no matter the size of the website. And you'd mentioned testing, and you should always, as the greatest extent possible, as much as you can, your testing should be done in a development area. You don't take your site live and say, hey, maybe I should think about testing all these integrations like Ian was talking about. Let's take the site live and then start testing, and then we find out we have 50 different broken things that now we have to fix on a live site. So Ken, let's start talking about the migration process itself. Can you kind of give us a high-level overview and talk about planning the site migration?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, you've got to define what it is that you want to accomplish. And, looking at your project objectives, is it to increase traffic? Just the types of migrations that Ian talked about, you need to kind of go through and say, okay, what are we doing? You should create a project plan, and you need to go through a process of, anything that you're going to work to remediate at this point. You really should be using a set of diagnostic tools to help you figure out what all it is that you want to include in the scope of the effort that you're going to be working on. And maybe it's a 2-step or a 3-step or a 4-step process. I mean, one of the things we do is we commonly break it into chunks so that it's a little bit more manageable. Let's take care of moving, from hosting where it's a slow hosting process, doesn't have all of the proper bells and whistles that a real business class website should have. Let's get it hosted on a new platform. Okay, now we've done that. Now maybe we talk about, the design and the the user experience aspect, and we work on that. Each one of these is, it requires its own project plan. And you have to look at what are the issues that you're going to have to deal with from the old side as you're moving forward with your migration. It could be site structure, it could be page content, could be to address speed issues that you've got on page load speeds for your website, or user experience, as Ian talked about, where navigation is confusing and doesn't make sense. Or maybe there's some broken stuff from an SEO perspective that you got to get fixed. You want to, whatever you're doing, you got to identify those and roll those into your plan. Then you've got to communicate it to all of the parties that are and stakeholders that are involved. Migrations like this typically don't just fall on one person. I mean, one person may do the bulk, if not all of the work, but they have to communicate to the business owner. It has to be scheduled so that you're not going to be impacting the business cycle in any adverse way. Why risk doing, any of this stuff unless there's a critical need, right before your big, like we're moving into the holiday season, for a lot of retailers, this is the biggest time of the year for them. They probably shouldn't be undertaking a major migration project at this point in time, because they're putting their business seriously at risk. So you want to look at the business season or the peak periods and kind of work it in to your schedule. Again, if you've got critical needs, yeah, that's a different story. But to the extent that you can plan this out and get it aligned with where you're not going to be adversely impacting the business, because this stuff is not always going to come across as perfect. The goal is to make it as perfect as possible, but sometimes you run across things that are not documented, and and so that's where the testing and quality assurance plan is critical. And as Paul, as you said, do this as much as you can in the development environment. But the only way you can do that is you got to plan for it, and you got to have a strategy. And most people, they rush toward, they run right past this way too many times. It's easy to build stuff, typically, and to get it to work. And you might do a little bit of light testing because, oh yeah, crap, I forgot to do this. Okay. So you fix it on the fly. But to really go through and run through a real full user experience kind of a test, or run it through how the search engines are going to see the website, you've got a plan for that. And so make that a part of the project and define it and identify it. And to the extent that you can, develop, a series of checklists, or hire somebody who has that experience to make it as good as good a process and as economical and efficient a process as possible.
Yeah, there's a saying in the carpentry world, measure twice, cut once. And that it's kind of the same thing here is, test. And I test 3-4 times. That's what I do. I know I irritate people, but you have to make sure things work.
Yeah.
So Ian, once the migration process is planned, you have to go through, and we kind of talked about this a little bit with the testing, but you have to go through a pre-launch preparation and testing. So what's all involved in that? We just kind of touched on it, but could you go a little more detail about it?
Sure. Yeah, usually, I hear a bit of an echo, but usually there's two main pre-launch phases. One is preparing the launch, and one is testing. And Ken talked a bit about the testing, but in the pre-launch preparation, you want to make sure that you've spec'd out everything you need to, like you've wireframed out what you want your website to look like. You've reviewed that. You spec'd out your technical SEO requirements. You've identified priority pages. You want to crawl your legacy website and identify all of the indexable pages. And you want to identify top performing pages, because those are the ones that are most critical to the performance of your new website, right? If you don't want to lose any Google juice passing through from your old website to your new website, you have to do all that identification. And then you need to prepare redirects so that you don't lose that Google juice. Especially if you're, like, a lot of times from an SEO standpoint, we make modifications to URLs because it will actually help your rankings. And so when you do that, you have to make sure you're redirecting old ones in case Google's linking to it, which they probably are because they crawl your website, your old website. If other people are backlinking to it, you don't want to lose any of that great traffic. And you, in that pre-launch preparation phase, you need to create a contingency plan. So what happens if you're doing your migration and things blow up, right? You need to be able to roll back your existing website immediately so that there's no loss of traffic or bad experiences for people.
Are you saying we should have a backup of the website before we launch the new one?
Oh, please. We didn't talk about that, Paul, but yes, please.
Why would you do
everybody
You mean the
backup.
Wayback Machine's not good enough?
So yes, you should have daily backups of your website that you can always roll back to. And then the second part of that pre-launch is the testing phase. So Ken, you talked about this, but you should be reviewing your content. Like, what does it look like to the viewer? You should be reviewing it from the technical side. You should be testing those redirects to make sure that they're working. You can even do like a site launch risk assessment to say, like, what potential things could be a risk for us when we do this. And one main thing that I often see people overlook, and it's so critical, is you need to benchmark your data. So make sure that you do benchmarking reports of your current website so you have that historical data. It should pass through if you've set up your Google Analytics properly and that kind of stuff, but take a snapshot because things can get broken, things can get lost. You want to make sure ultimately that you can do a comparison, right? So as soon as you launch it, you want to be able to compare what's happening. So the keys, I think, to both of these phases are ensure the migration is going to go smoothly, and then that the second is that your migration will help your search engine ranking performance and not hinder it. Those are kind of the two big things, but ultimately, as I said earlier, I think it's really about creating a seamless process for everybody so that nobody really knows anything happened unless things look radically better, which is a good thing.
If I can add one thing to that, you talked about the analytics. Now, if you're rebranding and you're changing your domain name, you should redirect your old domain to your new domain. And you're probably going to want to set up a separate analytics account because your analytics account or your analytics is tied to a domain. So you want that historical data, but since your website is now on a new domain, you're going to have to track that separately. So just another thing to be aware of. So Ken, once our site is live, what should be done during the post-launch review?
Well, Jen's got to help us get it live first.
Yeah,
right?
I got to do the
Did I skip over
pre-launch.
that again?
Yeah, I think you're allergic to my non-technicalness.
Well, all right.
He's like, I can't see you.
I'm having a rough morning. So all right, so far we've done our pre-launch. And now we're going to send the site live. So what do we need to be aware of and check while the site's actually being launched?
Yeah, so
That's a good point, Ken. See, that's why you test things.
And that's why you have a plan so you don't skip anything.
That's right.
That's right.
Cause some problems.
All right. So day of. So just first of all, just understand your site will be down. It doesn't mean it has to be down for days or any of the nightmares that you guys have talked about, these 72 hours and all that nonsense. But the site will be down. Let's just call it momentarily if it's done right. And there are redirects and whatnot, so that if someone comes to your site during that time, there can be a page that says it's just down for maintenance, so it doesn't look like anything's terribly wrong. But know that it will be down. So for a lot of I guess really it's called regular businesses, migrating. Migrating on a Friday is not a great idea, because if you need some extra hands or some extra help there, few people want to be working on that over the weekend if they're not expecting it. So be sure that that this is happening during a period of time that's not essential for your business. So it will be down. Once the site comes back up, your tech team needs to go to work on checking. There's a checklist that they're going to have to go through, both on mobile and on the desktop version, just to make sure that everything checks out well. Don't forget the mobile. And then after that checks out, the team will want to go over to Search Engine Console, and there's a checklist there as well, in order to make sure that everything's up and running properly. So.
All right, so now I have my plan in front of me. So, Ken, our new site's live. So there's always a post-launch review. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the testing plan that you put in place and that Ian talked about in the pre-launch, you'll largely want to go back through that again. You tested it in the development environment, but you're now in a new environment because you've pushed it live. So you need to go back and test. It's really easy when you're in a development environment, as when you're doing internal linking, for example, to have a link to the full URL, which is a staging area or a development URL. And when you push that live, that's no longer the right link, and it may take you back to the old development site, and so you might need to go in and correct a few of those if you miss those. So it's always important to test, and make sure you do that. As Jen mentioned, you want to go through and Google Search Console is your friend. I mean, you want to go through the crawl stats, and monitor what's happening on the live site over a period of time. And and server logs and any other sources of data, any other tools that you might be using for this, and you want to fix any issues, and those can be to immediately try to address anything that you missed with a 301 redirect, or fix anything that pops up as a 404 error, because we're humans. Even if we have the best testing plan, there are still going to be things that might be missed. And so you want to get all of those things taken care of. Another really common thing that seems to happen a lot is when people move, from one website to another, is the picture URLs. They get lazy. They copy the picture. It copies in, but it's still living on the old website. And that's where the old URL structure is. So when you turn off the old website, guess what? The picture breaks. So you need to make sure that you've got a process, to test and make sure that all your pictures are loading properly. And that's going to be because you actually put them on the actual site and had them hosted in the right place instead of relying on the old website URL. So just look for any of that kind of stuff. Structured data, is another thing that you need to go in and fix and look at and fix as quickly as possible. And then you definitely want to make sure you're looking at page load speeds and evaluating how fast the site is performing now that you've got it live, now that you've moved it over, and compare that. You can actually, run a report in Google Analytics to compare how your pre-migration site is performing versus the new not live site. So take a look at those kinds of things, and I think you'll be glad you did.
And Ken and Paul, do you guys like this? Is one thing I do. I'm just curious if you do it as well. We actually run so when we're looking at websites and trying to improve them, we use tools to do full, complete technical site audits. Mm-hmm. And we actually use those tools after launch to audit the new website, because often those will, like say a backlink somebody was pointing to the website gets broken, it will uncover those things. And we often find that very helpful.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Great point.
Yeah, and if I can add a couple things, is that you can avoid a lot of these URL and issues if you use relative URLs. And what that means is that you have mydomain.com/my new blog post. If you're linking to that, don't, and this is really from an internal linking standpoint or a navigation standpoint, don't put the domain part in there. Just put the /my new blog post. Because WordPress or any CMS platform, they know where you are. They know you're on that domain. So you don't need that full URL. All you need is the part of the URL after the domain name. And that will prevent a lot of those broken links, internal anyway. Now, if it's an external link, that's a different story. You have to have that. The other thing is, once you have the new website launched and you've kind of gone through a lot of this stuff, you should go back to Search Console and resubmit your sitemap. You should always do that. And that will also prevent a lot of Search Console errors, just submitting a new sitemap.
Well, and a lot of people they hard code, links,
right,
instead of letting the the benefits of the technology that you're working with help you create those links. And so, since they wrote HTML to actually build those links, sometimes those things break, especially if you're doing a copy and paste, where you don't really need to do a lot of design change on a particular site. You can just grab the copy from the old site, paste it into the new site. You still need to check for that kind of stuff. And like you said, the having the diagnostics tools and running those on the site after you've made your changes is going to help you catch some of those things.
And one very easy thing that you don't need any diagnostic tools for is check your calls to action. So I've actually, a business owner came up to me one time and said, "Hey, Ian, I had this website built a year ago. It's a little weird, isn't it, that I haven't gotten one form completion in all that time?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's super weird." So I looked at it in the back end, and whoever built the website never actually completed the form submission process so that it would email him when the form was submitted. So go make sure that all of your key calls to actions, which are usually the reason you have a website to drive activity, business activity, that they actually work, right? It's easy to do. Anybody can test it, but just take the time to do it properly.
Yeah, we've seen that too, where they were probably getting form submissions. They just weren't being notified that they were getting a form submission.
Exactly.
They were going to the ether. Yep.
So, Ian, so now there's one last thing that needs to be done, and that's measuring the site migration performance. So when should that be done, and how and what should be measured?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, you should really benchmark your current website even before you do the migration, just so you have that data, right? Then once you make a change, like we talked a little bit about how, like if you make DNS changes, domain name changes, those always take time to propagate around the world. Like they just do. They usually warn you it can take up to 24 hours. Usually they're done in like 10 minutes, but that can actually bring your site down. So you need to wait for that to happen. But then there's actually a waiting period where basically, Google is resetting, they've recrawled your website. Sometimes that takes days, sometimes even weeks. Like you have no control over how quickly Google crawls your website, except you can prompt Google to do it. But even when you do that, Google will say, "Hey, it's going to take between this and this time," which is a big, long period of time. Again, usually it happens pretty quick, but you have no control over that. So usually the ballpark figure, like for a small local website, we usually say wait a month, wait 4 to 6 weeks, so that there's enough data there that you can do a comparison. But even the day after, you should be checking your analytics just to see, hey, what's happening? Is traffic showing up? Did we break our analytics code, that connection between the website and the analytics? Because we see that a lot. And then for larger websites, it could even take 2 to 3 months to get enough data in order to understand, like, have we improved things or are there issues that are affecting this? Again, what you guys have talked about with Google Search Console, you can diagnose issues as quickly as Google's uncovering them. but yeah, just, I always work backwards from what's most important to the business. So things you should be measuring. So that's kind of the time frame that I covered. But things you should be measuring as a business are for sure your calls to actions. Are we getting more calls to actions than we were before? And those are usually form calls, form submittals. Obviously, things like the conversion rates, how Google Analytics is seeing the conversions. Even the conversion rates by device, taking a look at that kind of data in Google Analytics to see, are things improving for mobile, because Google has gone to a mobile first algorithm, right? So is it improving for mobile? Is it improving for desktop? Are our rankings going up? So being able to actually monitor the keywords that you want to rank for, and are those improving? And those things take longer than, a few days to show up. They take weeks to show up. And then, sometimes we see improvements within days,
Right.
depending on the competitive set. But yes, usually it's months. And then other data you can look at, how many visitors are coming to the website. Our bounce is exceedingly high, which, you're just looking for things that are pointing to issues so that you can fix them. But obviously, everybody wants to see the little green up arrow next to, when you do a comparison. If you're not familiar with Google Analytics, you can do, what's this month look like compared to last month. And when you see the little green up arrows with lots of, great percentage increase, that's what you're looking for. So it's, you want to find those things. And then the last thing you should really be looking at is in Google Search Console. How many number of index pages are there? How many pages are submitted versus indexed? Also, you want to make sure that your site page or site speed has improved, so it's actually quicker than when your old website, because that, as you talked about earlier, Paul, that can significantly hurt or improve your rankings. The last thing I should probably say is, you should set up a schedule for measurement and reporting. So this isn't a one and done. And a lot of times, whoever you hire to manage your marketing, your website, your SEO, they should be providing this to you, but it's accessible on Google Analytics. You can set up monthly reports to feed you the information, you should be keeping an eye on. And that's something you should have access to. And that's just a regularly scheduled report once a month, taking a look at it. What's the health of my website? Are we improving? Are there areas we need to fix?
All right, good answer. So I'm going to throw this one out to everyone. Any tools they would recommend when doing a site migration?
I'll
Have
go.
at it.
All right. I'll just mention a couple. One, because I love the name, Screaming Frog. It just always makes me chuckle. But when you're doing a migration, you need to be making sure that you're getting all of your pages and migrating those and handling those appropriately. They may not all migrate over, but you still need to do something with them, or you're going to break. As Ian talked about, you're going to break links, either from other websites, or it's going to cause Google problems because it's indexed a piece of content. So you need to find a way to gracefully map that over. And we've talked about the 301 redirects, and that's what that does. So Screaming Frog is a really great tool to help you kind of find all the stuff that's on your website and give you kind of that catalog of all of the stuff that you need to be working with. GT Metrics is a great tool for helping you understand how fast your website loads, and it gives you, actionable information and it looks at the different sections of your website, and it gives you ideas about, this image is just ginormous, which is a huge common problem. Images are almost always way too big, and it's almost always the fastest, easiest thing to fix to improve your page load speeds. And GT Metrics is really great for that. And then Pingdom Tools is it's a great tool to help you monitor uptime and look at page speeds from maybe like a real user perspective. So those are just a couple of things. I mean, there are so many tools that you could use, and it really, I mean, there are a lot of great tools out there that are going to help you on this path. Oh, and probably should mention, make sure you have a project management tool of some kind so that you identify and lay out the tasks and assignments and deadlines.
Yeah, Ken, you shared some of my favorites as well. Some other additions would be we use SEMrush a lot for keyword research and that kind of stuff, but it's also got a fantastic site auditor in there that captures everything from, the health, the speed, the backlinks that are coming to your website, the redirects, everything. And then another tool that we use is called Website Auditor. And that's kind of a standalone tool that, again, we use to do deep dive health checks on websites and diagnosing issues. So, but all the ones you mentioned are absolutely fantastic.
My recommendations are not any tools, but it's to have a reliable partner that can see you through this. And even if you are not technical at all, make sure that they are able to explain to you what's going to happen in a non-technical manner. So you understand the scope of the project, you understand what some of the pitfalls are that could go wrong or take longer, even on a well-managed project. And just be really clear about that. And then hire the best partner to help you through this, because your website is something that is vital to your business and to your company, and it needs the care that a professional will take in order to migrate it properly.
Yeah.
And a couple I'd add is Google's structured data testing tool and their rich results testing tool, so that you know what's going on from that standpoint. And unless anyone else has anything to add, I think this is a good place to wrap up. And
I just have one more quick comment.
Sure.
So, I come from a world of large scale software development, and what the software world realized and the marketing world has not caught up, unfortunately, and everybody who's listening to this needs to be aware of this. A website, think of it as like building a house, right? There are so many different facets and aspects to it, blueprints, permits, just think about what it would take to build a house. And don't think that a website is just a flip of the switch and it's all going to come across and work really well. You need to architect these things and having an understanding of what all it goes into building. And I think having an analogy of thinking about building a house, is not necessarily a bad one. In terms of the steps and the complexities and the components that all have to be pulled in together. The same thing's true with your website and a website migration.
yeah, it would suck if you built a house and realized you forgot to put the electrical wiring in.
Or you forgot a foundation.
Yeah, or you forgot the plumbing. All right, I think this is probably a good place to wrap up. Ken, Ian, Jen, thanks for joining us and sharing your thoughts on this topic. And thank you to our audience for joining us. And I hope you found this valuable. And we will see you next week.